Hello, welcome to the lecture series on microeconomics. We have seen income consumption curve and price consumption curve in previous lecture. Now, we are going to study comparative statistics analysis in even greater details. Today, we are going to talk about Slutsky equation. Now, what does that mean? When there is a price change, then the consumer faces two sort of effects. One, as price of one commodity changes, there is a change in relative price. So, the consumer faces a different exchange rate at which one good can be substituted with the other. The second effect would be a change in the purchasing power. Suppose there is a fall in price of one commodity. So, the consumer will feel rich psychologically because he or she has saved some money if he or she decides to consume the previous bundle. So, with that extra amount of money, now the consumer can purchase extra units of both the commodities. So, how to deal theoretically with these two types of effects due to a price change? So, we are going to talk about decomposition of price effects into substitution effect and income effect. So, as there is a price change, the total change in consumption demand for the commodity is called price effect, and that can be broken down into two different components known as substitution effect and income effect. So, the substitution effect takes care of the first effect that we talked about. So, this is due to the change in the rate of exchange at which the consumer can substitute one good for the other, and the income effect appears due to change in purchasing power. Now, how to decompose this total price effect into substitution effect and income effect? That remained a very important theoretical question, and two economists approached this problem in two different ways. We are going to study both of them. First of all, we are going to study the method proposed by a Russian economist Eugene Slutsky, and then we will follow this discussion with the method proposed by a Nobel laureate economist Sir John Hicks. So, first we will start with Slutsky method of decomposition. Before we go into the deeper details of these two different approaches, let us see how philosophically they are different. Actually, the difference emerges from this fact how to compensate the consumer from a price change. So, to compensate the consumer from price change, the consumer's money income has to be adjusted, and Slutsky and Hicks proposed two different methods to do so. Let us now look at the Slutsky method with the aid of a diagram. This is slightly complicated, so please pay attention. The drawing of this diagram is not that easy. So, we are working with two commodities as usual, x1 and x2. So, let us start with the initial budget line. We name it A B. Then let us assume that there is a price fall. Price of commodity 1 has gone down while price of commodity 2 has remained the same. This is the case that we are going to analyze. So, if this happens, we know from our previous comparative static analysis that the budget line will become flatter, because P 1 over P 2 has now gone down. So, let us say A B prime is the new budget line. Now, we will look at the consumer's equilibrium associated with two different price scenarios or budget lines. So, let us now superimpose the indifference map in this diagram. So, initially the consumer achieved an equilibrium point, say E1, which is the tangency point between the initial budget line AB and the initial indifference curve, say U1. Now, with this new price scenario, a different budget line has been drawn, AB prime. So, of course, a new equilibrium, consumer equilibrium is going to emerge, and let us assume that the consumer now has arrived at the new equilibrium point E2, which gives the utility level U2. Now, this journey from E1 point to E2 point actually is the total price effect. So, here we are going to only concentrate on the consumption of commodity 1 and not of commodity 2. So, this increase in consumption of commodity 1 is due to the total price effect. Now, the target is to decompose this total price effect into its components, income effect and substitution effect. First, let us talk about the substitution effect. Now, as per the Slutsky method, we need to compensate the consumer for a gain in price. Here price has fallen, so consumer has some extra bit of money, psychologically he or she is feeling richer. So, Slutsky says that we need to take out money from the consumer's pocket. Now, how much money should be taken out of the consumer's wallet? Slutsky says that take out exact amount of money from the consumer's pocket such that consumer is forced to consume the previous bundle, the original choice. How to go about that? So, Slutsky is saying that if you take out money in such a way that the consumer is forced to consume the previous equilibrium consumption bundle, then one can draw a new budget line, this broken line. Now, note there is a fall in money income and that is depicted through the change in the intercept term. Let us now introduce some notations for analysis. So, as there is a price change, denote delta P1 is difference in two different price levels. There is also some money income adjustment going on, and that is basically this. So, M prime is the new income and M is basically the original income. So, with these two notations, let us see what happens. Now, note that with new income level M prime, after reduction in money income, the consumer can consume maximum of M prime over P 2 units of good 2, which is lower than the previous amount. Earlier it was M over P 2. So, that is why we observe a fall in the intercept here along the x 2 axis. This is due to the money income adjustment. Now, as the money income adjustment has taken place, let us see with this change condition, with this changed condition, how consumer is going to find his or her new equilibrium. So, for the new equilibrium, we have to find again the tangency between the changed budget line, the broken line, and a new indifference curve. That can be done like this. So, let us assume that the consumer's new budget line, this broken line, is tangential to some indifference curve denoting utility level u prime, and the consumer reaches equilibrium at this tangency point. Let me name this E 3. So, we can see that as some money income has been taken out from consumer's wallet, the consumer now has to reduce the consumption of commodity 1, and a fall is noticed of this magnitude. So, this magnitude is basically the income effect, because here the consumer faces the same relative price ratio as the changed condition, and the difference which remains is the substitution effect, because here the relative price ratio is different. So, the exchange rate is different. So, let me write down. So, this is the magnitude of the substitution effect, and this is the magnitude of the income effect. Now, let us express this in mathematical notation. So, let us express the Slutsky equation first in mathematical notation. Let us introduce some new symbols. We have already introduced this symbol for total price effect, which is delta x 1. Now, the Slutsky equation, or sometimes it is also called an identity. We can have delta x s 1, that is the substitution effect, the change in quantity consumption due to substitution effect, plus change in quantity consumption due to the income effect. By the way, in some textbook, substitution effect is also called the pure price effect. Now, let us note down the equations. So, let us start with the substitution effect first. So, delta x S1 is equal to x1 P1 prime M prime minus x1 P1 M, and the income effect would be x1 P1 prime M minus x1 P1 prime M prime. Now, if you add these two up, then your total price effect becomes x1 minus P1 prime M minus x1 P1 M. Now, we are going to study the other method proposed by Professor Hicks. So, the best way to study Hicks method of decomposition would be through a diagram, but while drawing the diagram we can also talk about the philosophy behind Hicks's approach, why Hicks offered a different mechanism for money income adjustment. Hicks suggested that as we have to go for compensation due to a price change for consumer, let us fix the utility level for the consumer. So, when we are deducting money income for a price fall, then we should force back the consumer to the initial utility level where he or she belong to, where he or she found his first equilibrium for the original consumption choice or for the original consumption bundle. That is different from Slutsky's approach, because Slutsky said that it has to be the original bundle where you need to force back the consumer. Hicks is saying no, you have to force the consumer to the initial indifference curve. So, let us start with again a basic diagram where we have the original budget line, say A, B. Now, there is a change in price, and of course, the price has fallen as we have assumed in the early previous case. So, the new budget line is A B prime. So, the consumer finds tangency between the initial budget line and an indifference curve depicting utility level U1. Consumer again reaches another equilibrium, which is a tangency point between the new budget line A B prime and a new utility level depicted by indifference curve U2. This is the new equilibrium point. Let me call this E2 previously. Let me call the initial equilibrium point E1. Now, here lies the difference. Hicks proposed that we need to compensate the consumer, we need to take out money from consumer's pocket in such a way that the consumer is now forced back to the initial level of utility where he or she was before the price change. So, as Hicks said that let us keep the utility fixed. So, if the consumer has started with an utility level U1, let us keep that constant as well, and then let us study what happens if there is a price fall. So, Hicks suggested that let us take out some money from the consumer's pocket, because the consumer is now facing a lower price level, and if we take out some money from the consumer's pocket such that the consumer is brought back to the initial utility level, we are talking about a parallel downward shift of the budget line. So, that means that we have to create a new budget line whose slope is going to be the relative price ratio of the new budget line A B prime, but as money is going to be deducted, this will shift inward parallelly. So, this is the new budget line. This new budget line is now tangential to the old indifference curve, and this is another equilibrium point for the consumer if the consumer is charged with some money income because he or she faces a lower level of price. So, in that case, let us do this price effect decomposition exercise again. Due to a fall in price of commodity 1, the consumer increases consumption of commodity 1 by delta x amount, but note that if we take out some money from consumer's wallet as we want to compensate him or her, then the consumer finds a new equilibrium at E3, and that will lead to a reduction in consumption. So, this part is substitution effect, and this part is income effect, right. Now, let us see what is the implication of this substitution effect. So, this decomposition of total price effects in two parts is very important in microeconomics. These have several implications in the case of public economics and environmental economics, but we are not going to discuss them, but we are going to definitely see what is the implication of this substitution effect, why this is so important. The substitution effect actually gives a downward sloping demand function. How come? If you note that we are talking about tangency points along the same original indifference curve as the price falls or price increases, whatever be the direction of the change. If we are following Hicks method, then we are pushing the consumer back to the original indifference curve. So, if the case of price fall happens, we are talking about that the consumer has to find a point to the southwest of its initial position, because now as the price of commodity 1 has gone down, now the budget line has become flatter. So, the consumer has to move along the indifference curve to the southeast direction such that it reaches a point on the indifference curve where the slope is less. So, that means that convexity of indifference curve or the law of diminishing marginal rate of substitution is playing a big role to find out that the demand curve is actually a downward sloping function. So, with this diagram we can also introduce a new concept called Hicksian demand function or the compensated demand function. So, let us talk about two different price levels, say P1 to start with, and then there is a fall in P1. So, P1 prime, and let us now superimpose these consumption choices on this panel B graph. So, if we want to draw the demand curve that we have seen earlier, the Marshallian demand function, we have to talk about the total price effect. So, these two are the points as price of commodity 1 falls from P 1 to P 1 prime, there is a quantity demand increase for commodity 1 from this original point to this point. If I join these 2 points, we get what is called a Marshallian demand function. Note that I am joining them by a straight line, it may not have to be a straight line, for simplicity's sake I am joining them by straight line. So, this is known as Marshallian demand function. As this is the mostly used demand function in economics, this is also known as ordinary demand function. Now, if we focus only on the substitution effect, then we can see that the demand increase is only up to this point and not up to that point. So, one can also join this blue point with the initial red point, and if we join these two by say another straight line, then that also depicts a relationship between price of a commodity and quantity demanded of that commodity, and this new steeper demand function is known as Hicksian demand function, as this is coming from income adjustment and compensation of the consumer from a price change. This is also called a compensated demand function. So, when we approach this problem of total price effect decomposition, what way to go? We can think of a two-step procedure. As price of a commodity changes, we have seen there are two types of effects, the change in the relative price ratio and change in the purchasing power. So, we can fix one at a time and study the impact of the change in the other. So, in the first step, we can let the relative price ratio or the exchange rate vary while keeping the purchasing power constant, and then this step could be followed by fixing the exchange rate at its current level and then allowing the purchasing power to change and study what impact it will have on the consumption of commodities. In the next lecture, we are going to continue with this discussion on Slutsky equation, and we are going to get into some advanced topics in consumer theory.